Hi, everyone. My name is LaCheyna Sparrow Adebiyi, an International Inclusion Specialist. I am moderating this panel on behalf of the Beacon House School System. I want to thank you for joining us today for our live session at the 11th edition of the School of Tomorrow events, A World of Tomorrow, Negotiating a Better Future. Meet my panelists for this session about supporting at-risk and SEN learners during school closures. I have joining us today, Steve Crowley, Director of the School Evaluation Unit, Madeeha Ansari, founder of Cities for Children, novelist Mohsin Hamid, and Maggie Atkinson, former Children's Commissioner for England. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Hi.
The school closures we have experienced have been difficult for everyone. There's a population of students who have been presented with the gravest risks. These are the students with special educational needs. Students with special educational needs are students who need something different from or in addition to the normal student. In addition to having a special educational need, these students also deal with other hardships and situations, sometimes social and emotional hardships, sometimes types of abuse, maltreatment, and these unfortunate circumstances impact the students' learning, leading them to need more education support services. Okay. So panel, let's start out by talking, how has this shift from remote learning impacted this group of children?
So,
Do you want us to come in as we see fit?
Madeeha, if you'd like to start, yes.
Great. So, at Cities for Children, we work with student-connected children. When we talk about kids who have needs that may be different, I think the biggest thing nowadays, with the shift to remote learning, one of the biggest obstacles is access, of course. So Pakistan, for example, is near the bottom of the list when it comes to internet inclusivity. And a lot of the kids that we work with don't have access to digital options. And so the biggest struggle then is to actually reach them in order to teach them. I don't know if any of the others want to come in here, but the closure of physical spaces has meant the loss of a stable and protective space that children need to be able to access on a regular basis, and a loss of that sense of routine and structure, which is often so important for a child's well-being. Again, please feel free to jump in.
So you were speaking on the access to technology that also goes into the economic hardships. Since we have all switched to digital, a big emphasis around the world has been access to the technology that they need to learn. There was just this automatic assumption that every single child had access to a laptop or a tablet or just their parent's phone. I remember the discussion of, oh, they could use their parent's phone. Well, everybody's online, including the parents. So, how can we just make that assumption? And then again, with that group of students, that causes an additional stress on not only the student because they don't have the same access as everyone else, but also on the parent. So this going to remote learning wasn't an easy transition for students in general or families. Maggie, would you like to build on that?
I think the key issue for me is that almost all children at some point in their lives, some of them lifelong, will have additional or special needs. And the system it's the system's job to adjust to provide for and service those needs. It's not the child's job to reach into an adult world and make the adjustments. If you have a diagnosable special need like autism or like Down syndrome or like a physical disability or a hearing or sight loss, somehow you will be catered for. If you bring the needs that LaCheyna was talking about in her introduction into the system, then actually, if that's added to a lack of access to the digital world, you are lost before you start. And how is that fair on a child? Who has the power here? The power lies in the system and in the hands of the adults, not in the hands of the child. And if you have to adjust what you're doing and send out paper because the child has no access to internet, then that's what you do, ladies and gentlemen. It's not the child's job to adjust to what your organization needs. It's yours. It's not rocket science.
Well, and that was a challenge with many schools across actually the world, was how do we get even a paper to the child, because with the distance and the contact issues, no one wanted to do that. So there was just this huge jumble going around, like how do we get the students what they need? How do we hand them out laptops? Oh, the school has some laptops. How do we get those to them? How do we pass out our homework packets because they don't have access to print them? So there was definitely a big deal going into the access for technology. Does anyone else have anything they want to add to technology access? Or
LaCheyna, it's not exactly just the technology aspect, but I'd like to say I think that we need to recognize that the children are surrounded, they're in a traumatized environment now. They're traumatized themselves. The teachers that are dealing with them, they too are traumatized, as are their parents, as are their grandparents. And so for all of us, it's a huge challenge to manage our own trauma. And I think,
yes.
I think, teachers, it's a massive challenge for them not to transfer or to project onto children their own anxieties and their own fears about the current situation and the future situation. In a way, we're all vulnerable at the moment. And until the last one of us isn't vulnerable, we are all vulnerable. And it seems to me that our job is to actually deal with the trauma as well as all the technology issues and the other issues that go with it. But we have to deal with that trauma. We have to do that in a way that doesn't transfer panic. Trauma actually brings about panic. And panic affects your immune system, and it leads you to be irrational. And trying to be rational about all this. Children are pretty good at dealing with honesty, but they're not good at dealing with honesty that's loaded with anxiety and with panic. And so I think that's one of the major things we all have to do as adults that are related to these children, is we need to know thyself. We need to understand how we reacting to this. In what ways are we overreacting? How are we panicking? What are our fears and anxieties? And to be able to talk to the children about it in a calm, rational way, so that they know the truth. They're not frightened of the truth. They know the truth, but they receive it from the adults in a way that makes them feel as calm as one can possibly be in this environment. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so can anyone else like to add on to how we can provide that meaningful support to the SEN children and any other at-risk children?
So, to sort of build a bit on what Steve was saying, part of the panic and the anxiety is also around learning, because everybody knows that kids right now are not learning the way that they would be in normal circumstances. And so schools are in a state of panic, teachers are in a state of panic, as are parents in some ways, and even kids who are able to access technology are under immense pressure to be attending these sort of endless Zoom classes and keeping up and performing in a certain way. And I think also to kind of go back to the idea of this not being a normal situation, and this being a situation which is high stress for everyone, some more than others. Perhaps what does need to be included and thought about is the fact that kids need a lot more in order to learn well right now, and in order to, and part of that would be sort of being able to facilitate some kind of peer-based relationships and friendships, and to be able to have that a level of social interaction where they can relax and sort of feel better and therefore learn better.
That is, I mean, that's the foundation of early years learning, is you learn through socialization, and that socialization piece has been taken away. How can we get that socialization with this distance that we have to keep at the same time? As a specialist, I have seen and heard so many things from teachers, parents, and even students themselves. How can we get them that the good morning song that they do every morning? How can we sing the alphabet song together when we're on technology and we all can't talk at the same time? What are some things that maybe you guys have seen that are working, or heard from some of your colleagues that are working? Should we have schools open as centers in rotation versus just trying to get everyone there at the same time? Because we do need the social piece. Learning is social. That's from Vygotsky. That's classic psychology. We have to socialize. So how can we introduce that and also support all students, but also those SEN students who need that interaction to learn, who need to mimic what they're seeing? And autism is a classic example of that. They mock and they mimic everything in order to learn. So,
LaCheyna, I would urge that we use the opportunities that the pandemic has brought into our lives to think differently. Madeeha has just talked about peer-to-peer learning. Parents of children with vulnerabilities and special needs, particularly in the UK, although they were supposed to be in school, they were supposed to be a priority group. In some schools they have been, and in some schools they've been risk assessed out. And that's a great shame on the nation. But we have now new opportunities to think about how we group differently, what other professionals come into schools. Is there a hot desk for a therapist, for a nurse, for a social worker, for the local police officers who know the community and walk the streets? Is there a hot desk for the voluntary sector who can come in and talk to parents about poverty and budgeting and food and keeping a roof over your head? Do schools have the opportunity now to be real community hubs in the way that they ought to be? And there are schools across this nation and elsewhere in the world who do that brilliantly, who become the centres for food distribution and benefits advice, income advice, and even maybe CV writing in the hours when teaching isn't happening. And parents like that because it's not a threatening teaching learning environment, it's a community environment. And you can help calm each other's fears by having those discussions. Education is a rounded thing. It's not about chunks of knowledge base or skills or aptitudes. It's a human thing. And we have the opportunity, to reshape things in the new world after this pandemic, or as we go into living with it for a long time to come. This is not going to go away. We need a new way of thinking and being with each other. And children can lead the way. If you've been at home for 4 months with your parents, as many children in this country have been, you are actually an expert in the dynamics of groups, the way that people interact with each other, how you find space if you need to go and calm down somewhere, how you give each other a break, what happens when the learning isn't going well, how do you go for a walk with each other to find learning in nature or learning in your city streets without being in danger. Those are fantastic pieces of expertise that should come back into school and help teachers to be calm, as Steve said earlier, in the ways in which we go forward. This is a time for a new world, and we can make it together.
So with that being said, there was an immediate rush to just go back to whatever school was as normal. And a lot of the SEN population is actually thriving for the reasons that Maggie said. I have parents who have spoken to me and said, my student's doing fine. They're no longer having any behaviors because they can take breaks when they want to. They can go and, run outside for 20 minutes and come back and get their work done. They can go take a nap in the middle of the day. These are actually pieces of social learning that aren't allowed in the traditional school setting. So that student with ADHD or that high level learner, because along with the students who are below grade level and struggling, it also entails the gifted and talented students under the SEN category. These students are thriving because they're able to learn at their own pace. Gifted and talented is still struggling online because the majority of teachers still teach at just one level. However, if they want to accelerate that learning by just clicking on another web page, they can do so. So realistically, how can we in the classroom or in the school, how can we continue to support these students? You know, when we return, what are some methods that we think could actually work? Do we incorporate naps, you know, past, you know, early years? You know, what can we do? Do we have 3 recesses a day? All of these things have been in discussion for years. So as you're saying, Maggie, do we take this opportunity and go ahead and move forward with this? Do we move forward with year-round school? Most schools almost did that. We took 2-week breaks and then we came back again online, you know, took another break for the next session. So this is, like we said, this is the chance to go ahead and try something new. What are some of those new things that you guys think may work, or we should consider? Should we consider adding peer support into the day? We have the morning meetings with the,
It seems to me that it's worth asking ourselves, you know, what is school? And where does it come from? And is it fit for purpose? And how can it be improved or just completely rethought? So, you know, when I look at school, I see this kind of factory-like entity, which takes a bunch of children of the same age group, puts them into a room, and tells them to sit through shifts. And this was invented, you know, perhaps in the 19th century, 150 odd years ago, at a time when people were going into factories and made some degree of sense. Before that, we weren't educated in this way. We were educated in very small groups of people. Those who had wealth had individual tutors, but the rest of us, we learned from the people in our tribe. Someone taught us how to make the fishing hook. Someone taught us how to skin the animal. Someone taught us how to preserve the meat. Someone taught us, you know, how to repair the tent. And the human mode of education isn't necessarily what we call school today. And I think if we look at some of the things that we're talking about right now, which is to say, you know, that is this an opportunity, as Maggie said? I think it absolutely is. One thing which is clear is we need to be delivering significantly more individualized education, and we're struggling to do so. Also, we are fundamentally misunderstanding who we need to educate. We do, of course, need to educate the child, but we need to educate everybody else. We need to educate the child not just in maths and, you know, writing. We have to educate them in learning. What is learning? How do you learn things? We have to educate the parents who are delivering that learning, the sibling who maybe is at home, the peers that they see. You know, we need to think about the various interactions the child has and think holistically about what education occurs. Now, for myself, and I think most people that I know, there's been very little education that I have received as a parent in terms of how best to help educate my child over these months. I think it's a terrible shame. I think that and some parents may be willing to take this on board, others won't. But the idea that, you know, for each child, we sort of identify who is this child interacting with? How can those people better support the child's journey towards an education? How do we deliver these things to the child in a way that the child is actually happy, thriving, enjoying? Some will, in fact, as you say, benefit from being in this situation. So for me, it's not that we had a well-working system that has been disrupted. I think we had a fundamentally broken system that was basically just getting by for perhaps half the students and neglecting the needs of about half the students. And we now have an opportunity to radically rethink that entire thing, not to get back to where we were, but to move away from this factory and to focus more on, you know, each child as a member of our unique little tribe getting what they need to learn.
Absolutely. And that is actually special education. That is the epitome of it, getting each child what they need to learn. The most basic example is when you read a book, do you need a physical book, which is me? Do you need an audio book or do you prefer an ebook? And in our regular classroom before this, did we provide those options to the students in the classroom? And,
yes,
and that was not.
And I mean, the last thing I'd like just to say on this point is I think that there's at least two very important skills that we need to be thinking about in addition to arithmetic and, you know, reading and science and all these things. One of them is, how does one learn? You know, what is the way in which you learn? I, as a parent, my child, siblings, everyone. And the second one is, how do you teach? What is the way in which you impart knowledge or skills? And that can be teaching your child to cook, right? And saying, okay, let's make tonight's dinner. What is the objective of that lesson? How would it best be imparted? How do you think of that as being a component in your child's broader education? How does it fit into other things? And so I think now that we're looking at a future where careers are going to be, you know, very, very different from what they were in the past. Lifelong jobs will change. Technology will require constant re-education. I think the idea that now we need to educate ourselves both in how to learn and how to teach is fundamental. And it's something that I find myself doing all the time with my children, but also with myself.
Steve, you had something to add? You're muted.
I endorse everything that Mohsin has said there, but I'd like to bring it back to supporting these children during school closures. We've done a lot of observation of online teaching across Beacon House, across the Beacon House group. And one of the things that's a major challenge is identifying what is happening for vulnerable children. And I don't mean just assessment. And what's really coming out is the importance of insight and picking up the signs that children are experiencing a problem. If I were to give an example from an observation I was doing of a year 8 child who came on the screen and was actually holding a cuddly toy and rocking. Yeah, rocking. And it wasn't picked up by the teacher. Now, I think, you know, we mustn't get caught up in our old ideas of assessment and the criteria that we use. We have to be insightful and recognize, and I would urge schools to start gathering data on who had their cameras off, who never puts their camera on. What do we know about them already? Is there something going on? What are the indications from what we're seeing on the screen? What messages, if we look at all behaviors are a form, take it that all behaviors are a form of communication. That young lad that was rocking was telling the teacher something, wasn't doing it for any particular reason. And then he went back and lay on his bed and kept the camera on so they could, and he was cooled up with it. And it was such a clear message, you know, it was a cry for help. And we need to sort of talk with parents, grandparents about how to see the signs of a child being in trouble. And we need to gather the data. We need to use data. How many cameras are off? Why are the cameras off? What's the reason for them being off? Is there student A has never put that camera on, and we know that they have some special educational need? So I think it's a whole new ballgame, a massive challenge for teachers in terms of what information can you pick up while you're teaching online.
So how can, continuing with what you're saying, how can we set up structures to support the parents, the teachers, the caregivers, the students with this online learning during school closures? What can we do?
Absolutely. Oh, sorry, Madeeha.
No, Steve. I mean, I just found myself nodding very hard when and I mean, I think at this point and even before this and in future, there's a fundamental gap when it comes to adult knowledge and adult skills in handling needs that may be different and seeing the signs and that's something that that we need, that schools can work on too. But there's a public education response that is needed in terms of helping caregivers and helping teachers understand what's really going on, and giving that psychosocial support as well, but also very practical support. And a lot of the time, teachers in classrooms don't, maybe there are things that settle at the back of their mind, but they're not able to articulate what's going on with a child. So giving them the words and giving them the knowledge to be able to say, this is what's happening with the child, systematically being able to identify it is huge. We did some workshops with teachers in schools for children earlier, and one of the things, one of the themes was learning difficulties and behavioral issues, and how to address them. And sometimes there wasn't even an underlying problem. Sometimes the solution was as simple as communicating to a child in his or her mother tongue, for him or her to be able to understand the question. There was a kid who we did a math question to, he answered incorrectly when asked in Urdu and answered perfectly when asking questions. So it's, I think, being able to give those tools and being able to give that lens to teachers to be able to identify what's really going on with individual learners is a big missing conversation.
Steve, did you want to continue?
Yeah, we don't have very long, but one of the things I would say is that when teachers suspect there might be an issue with certain children, whether it be from inside or from data analysis, I think, you know, the opportunity is there to use videos of that lesson and to bring groups of teachers together who know those students and to watch that lesson together and say, what is it telling us? You know, much more discussion about looking for the early signs of response to trauma. And then I'd just like to say something about children who don't have access to, and schools who don't have access to technology. As much as possible, stay in contact. Multidisciplinary approaches. Find out who the doctors are of the children you know that are vulnerable in your school. Speak to the doctors, see what's going on, and make as many contacts as you can to make sure that those students, that we have some information on how are they coping. Yeah.
So how do we help those students, you know, going with that in terms of health and safety, and the ones that look at school as a safe haven? There are some students who are in, you know, abusive situations at home that we don't know about, or they don't have access to food and everything. How can we use the school as a support system for those students and for those situations?
I think that varies from country to country. It depends what the system is. You know, in high income countries, you're going to have social services, medical services. You can have a multidisciplinary approach. Here in Pakistan, that's very, very difficult. You know, we've got 22.5 million students that don't go to school anyway. You know, and it's a very, very difficult situation. But what we have to do is be as creative as we possibly can to reach those students. You know, there used to be a book called How to Reach the Hard to Teach. Well, we've got a new problem of how to reach the hard to teach now. And it's a much, much greater problem on a much greater scale.
Yeah, and let's talk about it. Maggie, do you have anything to add? Mohsin, anything to add? It's, you know, this is an opportunity to reach every learner in a different way.
There is that opportunity. I think I come back to what we were talking about earlier, which is reconfiguring the system. I trained to teach in the late 1970s, and part of the expectation on me as a very young teacher and right the way through my teaching career was that I didn't just teach my subject. I taught children. And children are three-dimensional beings just as you are and just as I am. And it's your job to have your radar tuned so that the child who comes into your classroom out of sorts or walks across the playground from the school gates towards you and you think, goodness me, there's something going on there. You are a professional and you are not just a subject specialist. If you were just a subject specialist, you should have stayed in university and done a PhD. If you're a teacher, you are a pastoral worker. You are a community worker. You may have people you can call on in your school or elsewhere. You may need training to continue to keep your radar tuned, but you are a holistic professional. School is about humanity. And if you have a child like the one that Steve just described, who is so out of sorts that they're throwing signals at you from every angle, then actually it's your job as a teacher to pick up on that, to find out who in your school can support you. If you're in a Western nation like the UK, to find out who else you could talk to have a proper, sensitive, quiet, calm conversation with that child's carer to find out whether there's something wrong at home. Has a pet died? Do they have to move house all of a sudden? Have they lost a friend? Much more serious and deep than that. And if it is, what help do they need to be your partner in keeping that child safe? It's very, very important that we don't lose sight of the fact that you join in to be a teacher because you want to be part of a human profession that looks at the child as a being, not as an empty vessel into which you pour your physics. It's really important, whether they've got a diagnosed need or not. It's everybody's responsibility, everybody's.
It seems that to do this, Maggie, what you're talking about, one important resource that we have is teachers' ability to teach each other. So I think, just having another teacher watch some of the interactions, watch some of the children, etc. Sort of a buddy system, where each teacher, particularly in this distance learning mode, where it's a matter of a simple click to watch each other. We have the teachers being supported with each other because, there may be some teachers who are, for example, very gifted at teaching physics, but less good at spotting the signs of a child moving a lot or a child behaving in a way or a child that seems to be unsafe. And so I think, if in a way, as opposed to being a kind of rating system of a teacher, how well are you doing these things? It would be useful if teachers, in a sense, were sort of paired up, and maybe not. It might not be the person that you are paired with also looks at your work, but that everybody has one job, which is to teach. Another job is to take a step back and watch the teaching learning process and give a bit more feedback. Because I think there's an opportunity here where both we can have we need to have both more connected education, access to better lectures, access to algorithms, etc., as well as more individualized education delivered to each child.
Building on that, Mohsin, you have a very similar story to me with education prior to becoming a professional. Talk about your experiences with writing as a child, because as a professional now, I know that your experiences are that of a gifted and talented child who is definitely not accommodated during remote learning. What were your experiences with writing when you were younger, and how did that develop you into your professional life? That's very interesting.
Well, I'm a writer now. That's what I do for a living. I write novels. And around the time I was about 8 or so, 7 or 8, 9 maybe, somewhere in the 3rd or perhaps 4th grade, we were in California. We were about to move back to Pakistan, and my teachers called in my parents to say that your son can't write. And my parents had realized, looking at my work over the months and years, that my writing looked like a series of illegible scribbles. And I was sent off to a special education room, which is in a separate little building on the elementary school campus, and had these mirrored windows so that if any child looked into it, they would only see their own face reflected. They couldn't see who was inside, which was, I guess, a measure of privacy, but also perhaps a sense of stigma of being in this environment. And quite quickly, the teacher asked me to block print, and then made the pronouncement that my handwriting was quite messy, my spelling was poor, I was prone to inverting the shapes of my letters and the order in which they appeared, but that actually I was writing very well, and that I should go back to my regular class, and I shouldn't have to write in cursive, and I can just block print. And I continue to block print throughout throughout my educational life. And I became a novelist, a child who couldn't write. But also, interestingly, and this is, I think, something we have to keep in mind, is that all of what we call special needs, even special needs that are not obviously gifted needs, but in fact, the special needs that appear to be, in quotes, impairments, are themselves potentially superpowers. When I was at Harvard Law School many years later, in the second year corporate law exam, which was this very important exam for those of us who wanted to get a job, I remember sitting down for about 2 hours and walking, 3 hours, it's a 3-hour exam. I walked out half an hour early, having written less than one exam booklet, people filling out 3 or 4 in my neat little block print. And I thought, I don't know if I've totally failed this exam, but I'm done. And so I sort of, I wound up topping in this exam. And as it turned out, that out of these 100-odd students, being forced to write very, very slowly in block print had created a sort of different skill set, which is think about what you want to say and say briefly, which that professor clearly seemed to value on that individual exam. And so I guess, for me, what's very important is that we recognize that neurodiversity is a source of enormous potential to the human, population. That we not think that, there are children who are gifted and children who are, et cetera. That it is this spectrum of different things that results in all kinds of wonderful, wonderful products of human creativity.
Absolutely. The student who could be going through the social emotional hardship right now could turn out to be the next psychologist, and honestly, that's most of the social workers and psychologists that I've met. They've had the most, devastating experiences that you could never imagine. And that has, caused them to want to help people in their adult life. So your story is the epitome of helping those students in at-risk situations, and again, what you said with teachers, letting that teacher who was teaching you writing may not have been the best in writing. They should have allowed a teacher who was, more versed in writing or language arts, as they call it, or literacy to teach you.
Absolutely. But also in making a sort of a decision that what we need to be taught is not necessarily what what teachers think that they're teaching us. In other words, back then, your handwriting was something you were taught. You were supposed to write well. Your handwriting was to be a nice cursive script. But somebody decided, in my case, look, we don't need to assess this child on this particular thing. How important is this thing? And thank goodness they didn't, which I think opens up a sort of a broader set of issues around what do children need to learn. And that is, to what extent are we handicapped? Are we sort of held back by our insistence on certain things that children must learn? When actually what we want to learn is for the child to be enthusiastic about learning things. We want them to be excited about themselves and where they're headed. We want them to be able to come up with an individualized approach to whatever they're trying to do, these sorts of things. And it may not be the case that every child has to satisfy the same boxes that we tick off. And this, just to close off, this is why I think this suspension of regular service in education is a very good thing. Because as we can see the kind of the madness of insisting that children take these exams and how do we invigilate these exams. Because the truth is, these exams are actually not the most important thing that we need to deliver to these children. And we have an opportunity to see that right now.
And with what you're saying also, that goes with assessment. There's a 21st century skill all the educationalists talk about. It's called assessment for learning. And what you're talking about is assessment for learning. We're looking at the individual student. Why are we assessing him on writing if we know he can only do block print? But we put everyone in this box, set down for this 2-hour exam. And then you have this kid who has a mental impairment because his parents are getting a divorce. I mean, there's so many circumstances happening on a daily basis without, COVID. How can we formulate assessment around these delicate circumstances along with the at-risk students that we deal with on a daily basis? What are some of your ideas? What should assessment look like for remote learning? What should assessment look like for that individual student who's rocking back and forth? Because guess what? It's soothing for him. He's unable to, type anything or submit anything because right now he's just busy writing. What can we do for those students? Or should we have the school center open where they come in to take exams? Do we do we get rid of exams for the time period? I know I was frustrated when I heard that some of my relatives, or just students in general, they were told to go home from campus, but yet they were still having their exams and their assessments. And I'm like, this is a huge transition. Everything is in flux. And the universities can't take a 2-week or a month pause before they, you know, give out these assessments. And technically at that moment, those university students were at-risk students. Some of them didn't have homes. Some of them didn't know where to go because they were living on campus. You know, there's so many situations that we've seen just on the news alone. So what are some of your ideas just in the realms of assessment? How can we work with these situations remotely?
I don't know if that was for anyone in particular.
Anyone.
One thing which I think is very, very important is that to talk about assessment without talking about objectives, to me, seems like putting things backwards. In other words, you know, first we must ask, what is the point of this? And then we can talk about assessments. Now, I think we prefer not to do this because in the case of many exams, the point isn't immediately clear. You know, why does this child need to regurgitate, you know, this particular set of stuff? Why is this the way we're going to determine what university they go to, what job they have, what, you know, income they make? It seems completely absurd. For me, one thing which is very important is for the child to be able to articulate what their objectives in a particular activity are, and then to conceive of what would assess their ability to get to those objectives. And I think this situation is much better, where you have individual projects that children can engage in, where in a way, if they can articulate what they are trying to do, and then they can articulate how successful they were in doing that thing, that will teach a very, very important set of life skills that simply preparing for a grade 6 or grade 12 exam won't teach them.
I can see what you're getting up there, Mohsin. And yes, children aren't going to be able to do that though unless they've learned the skills of self-reflection, of actually looking back on themselves and trying to understand themselves. How did I become the person I've become? And that's affective education. And, you know, we can do a lot with that. If I go back to supported children in schools now, one of the crucial things they need, and this covers in reflection, they need to see some hope. What would hope look like? Now, one good way of doing that is to ask children the question, what will you tell your own children and your grandchildren about the period of time that you lived through the 2020 coronavirus pandemic? To get them to visualize a future when the pandemic is not there is really helpful for warding off depression. To actually say, what are the things that you did in the past that you've lost? Can you close your eyes and imagine doing them again in the future? Because depression is undoubtedly something that we're going to be dealing with, and it's not revealing itself enough now unless we're insightful and we can gather as much data as we can to say, how can we identify it? There could well be lots of things going on at the moment that we're not identifying. And I don't mean assessment, I mean insight. There's a difference. Watching with insight and then talking to students about having a hopeful future, reflecting on their current situation. What are they going through at the moment? And you know, grandparents are great for this because children do not speak to their parents in the same way they speak to their grandparents. Grandparents get different messages. And I think we could really utilize the grandparents. We could bring them on board and make use of them to support the students through this current situation.
Maggie, do you have anything to add?
I would just ask us to draw back just a bit and look at the big picture. Unless you're in the USA, you are sitting within a nation which has signed and ratified the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. That convention says they all have a right to education, whether you like the fact that they're a square peg in your round hole or not. They all have a right to an education. It says that they have a right to an education that talks to them about aptitude, attitude, tolerance, being a citizen, being a member of the human race on planet Earth, not just subject content, although subject content will be important if you want to get a job in most disciplines. So there has to be a balance. But there is also an article in that convention that talks about children with additional and special educational needs, where you do ask them about their experiences, and you do ask their parents, and you are expected to adjust what you do to their needs and to be trained and to have understanding in your professional life, and to help parents to trust and understand that you're not going to break their fragile child. That convention is an absolute best practice marker for how adults should behave in ways that will give us a next generation of children who are truly educated, not just trained. And there's the difference. They are rights holders and we are duty bearers, all of us. And we are duty bearers to those who struggle and those who don't fit and those who are scared and those who are vulnerable and those who've had a terrible, terrible life. We bear that duty. And we all need to remember that and help each other to do it. Especially start with the vulnerable, start with the ones with additional needs, and you'll get it right for all the others. Start with the ones you struggle with, and you'll get it right for the rest. It's a fundamental shift in how we think about learning and teaching, as Mohsin said so eloquently a short while ago.
Okay. Would you guys like some questions from our viewers? When we were talking about, assessing the students, one of the comments were that ironically, we have handwriting contests, spelling bee contests, Jeopardy contests, school level, national level, international level. How do we get out of this box? I have a ton to say about that, but Mohsin, you're looking very interested in this. Please share. Steve's looking interested. Everyone's interested. I have a ton to say, so you guys take it first.
I don't think there's any harm in these sorts of things, but they should be understood in the same way that skydiving or ballet is understood. If you have a fondness for handwriting or for spelling, by all means, show the extent to which you can take your particular interest into exceptional levels of human endeavor. But it certainly shouldn't be how we think of the need of every child. And also, I think it's very important for us to, when we think of these sorts of things and the way in which the pandemic is upending, the day of the child or school, to ask ourselves the question whether that is in fact really the case. It may well be that for a majority of children on planet Earth, their daily life is fairly upended already. They do live in a situation where war or violence or sudden climate change or migration or dengue or polio or whatever is impacting their day-to-day experience, and that in Pakistan the school calendar is rescheduled on a regular basis for fear of terrorism, for heat, for this pandemic, and it might be worthwhile us stepping back and saying perhaps it's a minority of students on planet Earth who live in this world where education works in this machine-like precision, where nothing ever shifts and everything happens on time. And isn't it a wonderful opportunity for us to show all of our children that, aside from the spelling bee and the handwriting contest, that in fact, this is what it feels like to be a child on planet Earth being educated today. It is an experience where disruption can occur. And how do we think about ourselves holistically as human beings, inhabiting a planet where this is perhaps in its particulars exceptional, but in its outcome, maybe not that exceptional. And so for me, I would certainly be very interested in moving away from focus on these kinds of assessments that we just talked about, and more into looking at to what extent was our idea an illusion, and that we actually, in fact, inhabit a world which is deeply fragile for the vast majority of people who live on it. And what can we all learn from this and become, in a way, human beings better plugged into the reality of our Earth?
Anyone else? Maggie, Steve, anyone else wanted to share with that?
If I could just say, In bygone years, we used to talk about a curriculum that was broad, balanced, and relevant to the interests and needs of the students. It seems to me, as I've been watching education for the last 20 years at least, relevance to the interests and needs of the students has fallen off the end. And instead what we've done is what we think they should be interested in and what we think should be relevant to them. You know, I agree, spelling bee, all these other activities, they don't do any harm necessarily, unless the school places too much importance on them. Winning the spelling bee contest or winning whichever contest, you know, what message are we giving to the students? I don't think that too many schools actually, and they're not encouraged to, I don't blame the schools, they're not encouraged to by the system. They don't really explore what's relevant to the interests and needs of the students. And it may be different in different countries, in different parts of the world, in different parts of Pakistan. You know, people in Uttak, the students may have very different interests and needs to those in Karachi or in parts of it. I see Madeeha wants to say something, so over to you, Madeeha.
No, I just had one thought, and that was that the spelling bee contests or Jeopardy style contests in and of themselves are not inclusive, and they're not inclusive to children with different needs. They're not inclusive to children who come from situations where they're vulnerable because of their social and economic circumstances. So maybe that's something to think about. Actually, what does the field look like?
It's really, like you guys have definitely said, it's all about just thinking outside of the box and doing something differently. And remote learning gives us that opportunity. But naturally, as humans, we go right back to whatever normal is. And right now, this is just a new normal. We have another question from the audience. Again, I have, you know, an immediate answer for it. But what are some usual challenges for the SEN students with online learning? How can the school support them and make a connection with them? If you guys don't have an answer, anyone have an answer? I have one waiting. Okay, so I'll go ahead and answer. Honestly, the most challenging thing that most schools are seeing are when we have the special needs assistants. Those are the students who need the hands-on learning, the hands-on therapy support. If they're not good at writing, someone who's holding their hand to get them through writing. And that's still a challenge, and that's going to take time because that's the therapeutic part of learning. However, what is happening when they're a part of the regular online classroom, and this is across the world, I've been speaking to colleagues, is that the traditional, you know, general education teacher is still holding them to the same standard as everyone else. They're still giving them the timelines that Mohsin was saying that, you know, yeah, we're giving a school, you know, yearly timeline, but there's also these timelines in the classrooms that SEN students either need more time, or if they're gifted, they need less time. And so we've got to, and all that comes back to assessment. So again, it's kind of that assessment piece is kind of impeding on the quality of online learning from the SEN students' perspective. And it's also putting pressure on the parents. Again, the parents are like, oh, the student is fine because, you know, the parent is right there with them working hand in hand. But in the classroom, it's not necessarily like that. They don't have the same support that they would from their caring parent or their caregiver. So I answered that question. Sorry, guys. Another question from our viewers. What about the rank orders of students and examination systems? So no matter what we assess, exam boards require students to be put in a rank. Anyone have any feedback for that one?
I would say that if what we've all been championing this morning, which is really quite radical changes to the ways in which schools operate, is done in a bubble, it won't work. For me, we are talking about whole system change. We're talking about how we train teachers all the way back to their very first day as entrant students on a teaching course. We're talking about how we train psychologists and social workers and school nurses and pediatricians and everybody else. We are therefore also talking about how we challenge examination board thinking and practice head on. It seems to me that whilst the content has got more complex in the 21st century than when I set my A-levels in the English system, the basic A-level system is what it was in 1977 or 1978 or whenever it was I sat. So no, it was 74, 75. It hasn't moved on. If we're going to move on what we're doing in schools, then we're not getting them ready for the exams as they always were. We're getting them ready for a new way of assessing and a new way of judging. And exam boards have to be part of that. Otherwise, everybody will always face the car at the wall that has test written across it. And you drive the car towards what you're looking at. And I'll end by saying, and then I'll mute, I promise. If school is getting children ready, as it often claims, for life in the big world outdoors, the big world outdoors includes in it people who are neurodiverse, who have disabilities, who have diagnosed genetic conditions, who may have life-limiting conditions and die early. If you're going to get children ready for the world outside, you have to live the world outside with those children you're getting ready. Otherwise, they'll always be scared of people who are different. And that's a worldwide problem. We don't like difference. We don't like others, whatever they look like or behave like or how they see themselves or the world. And school has a huge part to play in readying children for a world that is diverse in all ways.
Okay. So that goes on to going with the next question, probably our final question, is how do we end this race for learning? How do we get rid of this high achiever talking? How do we, amongst the parents, the society, all partners, so that the students aren't left out? How do we get rid of this language and move forward and take advantage of this new opportunity for learning that we're doing remotely? Steve, do you have anything?
Okay, well, I think that one of the things that came out of a McKinsey report not too long ago, a very recent McKinsey report that applied machine learning and data analysis to PISA results, which in themselves are tests, yeah? And they tried to identify what were the drivers of student learning across 6 different regions across the world. And you know, the same thing came up in every region: mindset, student mindset. And I think our examination system is not going to change until we change adult mindset. It's a mindset issue and it needs much more debate. We're not learning from history. The history tells us that the examination system is failed. It's not going to help people in the 21st century. It's definitely not going to. And yet we're going to play on with it unless we can get people changing the mindset, coming together and putting pressure on the examination boards and higher education to say we need to look at something different. In Kasim Kasuri's conversation with Andreas, it was very interesting to hear Andreas talking once about testing competencies rather than knowledge and skills. You know, back in the 1970s, the Royal Society of Arts had a competencies-based curriculum. I still have it. And it's far, far more interesting and relevant to our students of today than the curriculum that we find in the English national curriculum or almost everywhere across the world.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your time today. During this session, we have briefly talked about the impact of school closures on our at-risk children. We've discussed some of the governments, we've discussed laws, we've discussed pullout sessions, we've discussed technology, socioeconomic, social, emotional, mental health, differentiating instruction, assessments, staff roles, how to help parents, caregivers, and of all, how to help our students. So on behalf of Beacon House and myself, I'd like to thank our panelists for their participation. And also, these events would not be possible without the support from our lead sponsor, UBL Bank, and our other corporate sponsors. I want to thank you guys for joining us today. Thank you for being a part of the panel. It's been
Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.